Welcome back to the Stoic Inspire. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the weight of someone's presence without them saying a single word? A kind of stillness that commands more attention than any speech. A kind of calm that unsettles the restless. A kind of silence that feels less like absence and more like domination. This is the power Niccolò Machiavelli understood. The art of not arguing. Because every time you argue, you are stepping into a battlefield you did not choose. You are fighting a war you did not declare. And in doing so, you surrender something far more valuable than the argument itself. You surrender your frame, your composure, your unseen advantage. Machiavelli saw that true influence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't plead to be understood. It moves in silence, pulling others into its gravity, while never exposing itself to their chaos. Today, we're going to explore why refusing to argue isn't weakness. It's strategic power. Power that protects you, positions you, and ultimately sets you apart. Stay with me, because understanding this could change not just how you handle conflict, but how you shape your presence in a world that's always shouting. Silence commands. Ego reveals. Let's talk about why arguing is almost always a losing game, especially when it comes to real power. Niccolò Machiavelli, the master of strategy, understood something that many still fail to grasp. Today, influence is not about noise, it's about perception. In the subtle game of power, the man who argues is the man who exposes his weakness. Why? Because arguments appeal to reason, but people are ruled by ego, pride, and emotion. The very act of arguing reveals that you are emotionally invested, that you can be provoked, that you need to prove yourself. And to those who understand the quiet language of power, that need is the clearest sign of vulnerability. It's not the strength of your logic that matters. It's the weakness you reveal the moment you step into the arena of verbal combat. Machiavelli knew it. So did the great minds who followed him, from Sun Tzu to the strategic thinkers of our time. They all echo one unchanging rule: never argue. Influence from a distance. Control through subtle suggestion. Lead through perception, not confrontation. Because when you argue, you don't just fail to convince. You entrench the other side even deeper in their views. Every word you throw is not a weapon. It's a shovel, helping them dig deeper into the fortress of their pride. Understand this. The more you try to change someone's mind through direct confrontation, the more they resist. Not because your arguments are wrong, but because their ego has now been challenged. And ego will always fight harder than logic. Arguing creates enemies. Arguing creates bitterness. Arguing makes you look small, reactive, and easily disturbed. But silence creates mystery, and mystery is power. When you remain unmoved, when you refuse to step into the emotional mud pit others invite you into, you signal something far greater, that you are above the petty need for validation, that you cannot be baited, that your peace is sovereign. This is why the powerful do not explain themselves. They influence through presence, not persuasion. They plant ideas like seeds, not hammers. They move others without ever raising their voices. Machiavelli understood, and the Stoics reinforced, that true command comes from restraint, not reaction. On the grand chessboard of life, the one who stays silent forces others to play their moves blindly. And that blindness is your greatest advantage. At the end of the day, the man who masters his tongue masters his destiny, because silence speaks volumes where arguments only expose the cracks. Arguments feed ego. Silence builds power. Let's talk about the hidden cost of arguing, a cost that Niccolò Machiavelli and even the Stoic philosophers understood with piercing clarity. The very moment you argue with someone, you are stepping into their world. You You are acknowledging their frame, their narrative, their emotional bait. And no matter how logically sound you are, the instant you engage, you have already lost something far greater than the argument. You have surrendered the mystery that once protected you. When you argue, you reveal your boundaries. You show where your patience thins, where your ego flares, where your calm is breached. And even if you win, you have lowered yourself into the arena of emotional warfare, a place where perception always outweighs logic. The man who refuses to argue, on the other hand, becomes a fortress without doors, unreadable, unshaken, unreachable. Machiavelli, like the Stoics before him, knew that true strength is not in being the loudest voice, but in being the most untouchable presence. Silence, when used wisely, is not passivity. It is a mirror. It forces the other person to wrestle with their own words, their own pride, their own thirst for validation. And in that void, they crumble. Because most people do not seek truth when they argue, they seek control. They seek to pull you into their chaos and measure their strength against yours. But when you refuse to step forward, when you remain unmoved, they are left swinging at shadows, exhausting themselves against a presence they cannot shake. Understand this. Power does not come from having the last word. Power comes from needing no word at all. The man who speaks little but sees much holds an advantage that cannot be seized, because no one knows where he stands, how he feels, or what he will do next. He becomes a question no one can answer, a problem no one can solve. And that mystery, that carefully guarded silence, is an armor stronger than any argument ever forged. At the end of the day, the one who does not argue is not defeated, not exposed, not weakened. He simply remains unshaken and in command, while others waste their strength trying to provoke a ghost. Silence protects power. Let's talk about why silence is one of the most strategic shields you can ever wield, a truth that Niccolò Machiavelli and the ancient Stoics alike understood at the deepest level. In The Prince, Machiavelli advised rulers to appear merciful, faithful, humane, upright, and religious, but to be prepared to do the opposite when the winds demanded it. Why? Because appearance is a weapon, and argument is often the slip that exposes it. To argue is to lower the mask. It reveals emotion, insecurity, bias. It invites dissection, opens weaknesses, and lays bare vulnerabilities that enemies can exploit, in courtrooms, in negotiations, in politics, in the delicate currents of human relationships. Those who truly hold power rarely, if ever, argue. They make statements, they leave hints, they suggest, and more often than not, they let the silence stretch longer than the noise ever could. Because words, no matter how carefully chosen, can be twisted, reinterpreted, turned against you. But silence is untouchable. It leaves nothing for the opponent to seize, nothing for resentment to sharpen its claws upon. Machiavelli understood a deeper human truth. People may forget your exact words, but they will never forget how you made them feel. An argument might grant you victory in logic, but it also leaves the other party feeling humiliated, cornered, resentful. And resentment does not die quietly. It festers, it plots, it grows into rebellion. In leadership, this truth is even sharper. The manager who argues with his team erodes authority. The executive who defends every decision breeds doubt. But the leader who listens more than he speaks, who moves without announcing, who acts without justifying, that leader becomes a pillar, stable, unshakable, trusted not because of words, but because of presence. Look closely at the greatest diplomats, the most effective negotiators, the generals who changed the tides of history. They did not waste their strength arguing. They maneuvered. They observed. They allowed others to spend their energy explaining, justifying, reacting, while they remained composed, patient, silently gathering leverage. And when they moved with precision, not passion. They understood that in the true game of influence, the loudest man is never the most powerful. The most powerful is the one you cannot read, the one who makes no promises but commands loyalty without asking. At the end of the day, your silence is not emptiness. It is your strongest position, your highest form of discipline, and the invisible hand that shapes outcomes without ever exposing itself to attack. Silence outsmarts chaos. Let's talk about why silence, not argument, is the true language of power, and why Niccolò Machiavelli and the Stoics alike knew that mastering your emotions was the first step to mastering outcomes. When you argue, when you rush to defend yourself, to be understood, to prove a point, you are unconsciously revealing a truth far deeper than your words. You are pleading. You are saying, "Please see it my way." But why should you need that? Why must your truth be shouted from the rooftops if it is truly unshakable? Marcus Aurelius, the great Roman emperor and Stoic, would have smiled at this lesson. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." And Machiavelli, centuries later, stripped it of its moral framework and showed it as pure strategy. If your position is strong, you don't argue, you act. You don't defend, you demonstrate. True power needs no validation, no applause, no emotional sparring match to confirm its worth. It simply is. Arguing, then, becomes a covert form of insecurity. It is the fear that without explanation, you will be dismissed. It is the desperation to anchor your worth in the shifting opinions of others. But the man who holds real power knows better. He understands that approval is a fleeting currency, and that true influence flows not from being understood, but from being unmoved. The most composed man is not feared because he's aggressive. He's feared because he's immune. You cannot bait him. You cannot provoke him into foolish exposure. He does not seek to win the room. He becomes the room. Machiavelli's brilliance was not in inventing human nature. It was in laying it bare, in showing how strategy, not sentiment, moves the world. And when it came to argument, he was ruthless in his clarity. Persuasion is for the powerless. Influence belongs to the strategic. Because the moment you argue, you abandon the position of command. You step into their arena under their rules, dancing to the rhythm they set. But when you remain silent, when you observe, when you withhold, you stay above the chaos. You let others exhaust themselves while you conserve your force for the moment that matters. In modern life, you see this everywhere. In business, the man who argues in meetings or fires off long emotional emails reveals his attachment to the outcome, and thus his leverage weakens. But the one who listens carefully, who nods strategically, who speaks only when it shifts the entire room, he commands silent respect. He is not remembered for the noise he made, but for the precision he delivered. In relationships, argument turns affection into rivalry, love into territory to be defended. Every word becomes ammunition, every silence a battlefield. But the one who refuses to argue, who instead withdraws, recalibrates, and lets action speak, wins not through domination, but through emotional mastery. Control is never about overpowering another. It's about mastering yourself so fully that no one else's chaos can draw you into their storm. In public life, you see the same pattern unfold. The person who argues on social media, who defends every slight, who wrestles every insult, they become predictable, diminished, a figure of reaction rather than authority. But the one who holds their tongue, who lets critics shout into the void, who who lets time, truth, and action be their defense, that person becomes untouchable. They cultivate mystery, the rarest form of power. As Robert Greene reminds us, mystique is not an accident. It is a weapon. You must see the deeper pattern. When someone tries to argue with you, they're not just debating ideas. They are baiting you into a frame, into an emotional quicksand, where you lose your footing and your clarity. If you step in, you have already lost, because now they control the tone, the tempo, and the terrain. But if you stay silent, if you observe with a calm mind, if you let their need to be right expose their weakness, you win without a struggle. Machiavelli did not waste energy on fairness. He cared about results, and in the realm of results, arguments are disastrous. They escalate small tensions into long wars. They harden opposition instead of softening it. They create enemies out of people who might have been neutral. Worst of all, they expose your emotional landscape to public view, giving others the keys to your reactions. So what do you do instead? You observe. You listen. You absorb everything, but reveal nothing. You measure the terrain with patience, and when the time is right, you act, not with explanation, not with argument, but with finality. You move cleanly, silently, without fanfare. You let others fill the air with noise. You let them wear themselves down with their need to be seen, to be right, to be validated. You, meanwhile, remain a fortress of stillness, calm, composed, centered. And when you finally do speak, when you finally choose to move, your words are not thrown into the battle like arrows. They fall like a hammer, precise, final, undeniable, not to debate, not to convince, but to end the conversation before it ever truly begins. This is the ultimate Machiavellian move. This is the Stoics' discipline: to refuse to argue, to speak only when it matters, to let silence speak louder than anger ever could. Because silence cannot be twisted, it cannot be quoted against you, it cannot be defeated. It floats above the chaos, untouched by the desperate need of others to be understood. At the end of the day, the man who understands this truth knows that his greatest weapon is not his argument. It is his indifference. And within that indifference lies an untouchable advantage that no force of words can ever overcome. Refusing to argue commands respect. Let's talk about the hidden strength behind refusing to argue. The kind of strength that Niccolò Machiavelli and the Stoics both understood, but few today have the discipline to wield. The true power of silence is not only in what it prevents, but in what it creates. It creates an open field, a vacuum where your words aren't diluted by desperation, where your presence alone grows heavier, more imposing, more commanding. In a world where noise is mistaken for relevance, silence becomes the rarest and clearest signal of power. Machiavelli, with his brutal honesty about human nature, recognized this perfectly. Silence isn't absence. It's tension. It's gravity. It pulls people in. Arguments, on the other hand, push people away. They scatter your energy, reveal your emotions, expose the very triggers that others can use against you. When you argue, you surrender the advantage. But when you stay composed, when you say little and move only when it matters, you turn silence into an invisible force that bends the room around you. Think about it. The colleague who expects you to react when challenged publicly. If you argue back, you validate the spectacle. But if you stay calm, acknowledge only what matters, and redirect attention to outcomes rather than emotions, you dismantle the conflict before it ever truly forms. You don't defend yourself because you're not there to perform. You're there to produce. And in that rare composure, people lean in. They listen more closely. They begin to respect you, not for what you argue, but for what you refuse to explain. Or consider the emotional partner who lashes out, seeking to bait you into a storm. If you meet that storm with your own fury, you lose. You lose your frame, your peace, your strength. But if you stay grounded, speak only when needed, or simply say nothing until the chaos burns itself out, you remain sovereign. You don't win by overpowering their emotion. You win by refusing to be dragged into it. Even in the modern battleground of social media, the public coliseum of instant arguments, the same principle applies. The moment you start defending yourself against petty criticisms, you hand over your authority. You trade your presence for participation. And Machiavelli would remind you, those who must explain themselves have already lost standing in the eyes of the crowd. Silence in this arena is not weakness, it's filtration. It separates what deserves your energy from what doesn't. It turns provocation into white noise. But why is it so hard? Because ego whispers in our ear. The ego demands to be right. It demands to be seen. It demands to be the last voice in the room. And when we listen to it, we are pulled into fights that are beneath us, arguments that do not elevate, but diminish. A Machiavellian mind, however, does not feed the ego. It uses ego, the ego of others. It watches carefully as others expose their insecurities, their impatience, their need to be validated, all while it remains untouched, observing. Because every argument you avoid gives you priceless information. The more they speak, the more they reveal their intentions, their weaknesses, their blind spots. And the more you stay silent, the more you remain the unknown quantity. And the unknown is what people fear the most. Not because you are hiding something, but because you have mastered what they cannot even control within themselves. Here's the paradox. The man who refuses to argue often ends up having the most persuasive power. Why? Because silence cannot be debated. Silence cannot be refuted. A man who doesn't argue isn't submitting. He's observing, calculating, choosing. His words, when they finally come, are few, but heavy, cutting through the noise with precision. His silence isn't retreat. It's artillery held in reserve, ready to strike when it matters most. And Machiavelli understood an even darker truth. When you argue, you are teaching your opponent how to manipulate you. Every defense you make, every emotional slip you show, gives them insight into your psychology, what you value, what you fear, what provokes you. In their hands, this becomes a weapon. But if they can't provoke you, if your calm remains intact despite their provocations, you deny them their greatest advantage. You become unreadable. And the unreadable man is the most dangerous man in any room. This doesn't mean you never speak. It means you only speak when the words serve a strategic purpose. The Machiavellian mind is not reactive, it is selective. And through that selectivity, it commands a level of respect that cannot be begged or demanded. It must be felt. Look at how this unfolds in real life. In personal conflicts, when people throw accusations hoping to pull you into the mud, your calmness becomes their frustration. In debates, when others hurl attacks, and you respond not with defense, but with clarity or silence, you control the room. In leadership, when a crisis sparks panic, the leader who doesn't over-explain, but moves decisively without fanfare, becomes the pillar others lean on. This is not theoretical. This is how real influence is built. Even in war, Sun Tzu knew, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting, to win without argument, to defeat chaos not by matching it, but by transcending it. This is Machiavellian warfare at its finest, psychological dominance without emotional expenditure. So how do you apply this in everyday life? When challenged, pause, breathe. Let the tension rise without you needing to release it. Respond, if necessary, with calm, finite phrases like, "You're entitled to your view," or simply say nothing at all. Let them wonder. Let them doubt. Let them speak themselves into exhaustion. In digital spaces, don't engage unless the conversation serves your long-term vision. You don't owe energy to every critic, every comment, every provocation. Silence is not a sign of defeat. It's a deliberate filter, keeping you on mission while others drown in noise. In relationships, refuse to match emotional outbursts. Refuse to explain yourself when attacked unjustly. Instead, slow everything down. Create space. Choose your response not from emotion, but from command. And in business, don't defend. Deliver. Let results be your argument. Let your success, your execution, your proof be the loudest voice in the room. Because here is the final undeniable truth. You don't need to win arguments when you have already won yourself. When your confidence is internal, not external. When your peace is anchored inside you, not hanging on the approval of strangers. When your sense of value is so deeply rooted that no insult can uproot it. That kind of man, the one who doesn't flinch when provoked, doesn't chase applause, doesn't argue to be seen. He doesn't need to demand respect. His very stillness commands it. At the end of the day, the greatest displays of power are not found in shouting matches, but in the man who can sit quietly, unmoved, unprovoked, undefeated, while the world shouts around him. The man who refuses to argue wins battles most never even see. He leads not by demanding attention, but by moving with quiet certainty. He influences not by chasing approval, but by embodying a calm so steady that others cannot help but follow. He doesn't fear being misunderstood, because he understands something deeper. That disciplined silence speaks louder and strikes harder than 1,000 desperate words ever could. If this message resonated with you, remember to subscribe so you never miss the insights ahead. And in the comments, write, "Stay silent." A quiet reminder of the power you carry within. Stay grounded. Stay patient. Stay untouchable. The next step of this journey will take us even deeper into mastering yourself in a world that demands your reaction. And trust me, it's worth it.